Hi and welcome to WEH Videos. My name is Skip and this is part 5 on my series on learning how to fly for beginners in X-plane. And today we're going to take another little flight around the airport in the pattern. I'll discuss a little bit more about pattern work. And we're going to talk about 3 instruments today. We're going to discuss the airspeed indicator, the altimeter, and the vertical speed. These instruments work off the pitot-static system. It works off of air pressure. If you go to the FAA website and go to the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, Chapter 8, you can read all about how this works. We have the pitot where we have pressure when the airplane is flying through the air. We have ram air that hits the pitot and that goes to the airspeed indicator. And then there's a port on the side of the airplane where we pick up the static pressure, and that static pressure goes to the altimeter and the vertical speed indicator and also the speed indicator. Now you can read all about this at the website here. I'm not going to spend any more time on this, but let's take a look outside and see where these components are. On the pilot's side of the airplane, or the left wing, we have the pitot right up here. And this is where, when the airplane is moving through the air, we're going to get the ram air pressure here, and that will go to the indicated airspeed instrument. Now, they don't show it here, but on the side of the Cessna 172, there's a little port right here, just a little tiny hole, and that's where the static air pressure is sensed. These are also things we check on our pre-flight. We want to make sure that there's nothing fouling up this little port here, and we want to make sure there's nothing fouling up here, because obviously if they are plugged or there's a problem, our instruments aren't going to work properly. So take a little time and review the Chapter 8 and read up on these instruments so you understand what makes them work. So let's take another flight around the pattern here at Benton Field, but this time we'll use runway 15 instead of runway 33. Remember, for runway 33, we needed to be in a left traffic pattern, but we must fly a right traffic pattern for 15. So why do we have different traffic patterns? Well, for many airports today, it's because of noise. And I think that's part of the reason why we fly this route for 15 with the right traffic pattern. The city of Reading is over here on the east side. So using a right pattern for 15 keeps low-flying airplanes away from the city. And there certainly is a safety factor here as well. If something goes wrong, it's much easier to find a place to land over on this side than over the city and in the neighborhood areas. All right, to make this a little quicker here, I've done all the pre-flight stuff and I've taxied over, and we are going to use, like I mentioned earlier, runway 15. We have no winds, and I have gone through our before takeoff, so doors and windows, the flaps and the trim are all set. We got the lights and the transponder set. So we are ready to go. I also have put a little trim elevator indicator up here so you can see what I'm doing and how I'm trimming the airplane as we're flying along. So finally, we're on our way. Let's go ahead and take off. We're going to do a quick look to see if anybody's coming. We don't see anybody. We've listened to the radio. We don't hear anybody. So we'll make our announcement. And it goes like this. Benton traffic, Skyhawk 84 Delta Lima, departing runway 15 Benton. We'll stay in the pattern, 15 Benton. All right, let's go. You want to get out here on the center line. And once we get lined up right, let's go full throttle, nice and smoothly, trying to stay in the center line. And we get to 55 knots and we lift off. Now for liftoff, we didn't have to do an awful lot. We just lightly pull back on the yoke. The nose will rise up a little bit, and then if we have the plane trimmed properly, we shouldn't have to be holding back on the yoke at all. If we are having to hold the yoke back a little bit on the takeoff, then we need to do a little bit of trimming. The whole idea of trimming is to take the pressure off the yoke. So let's continue on. All right, now don't pay much attention to your vertical speed at this point. It's going to bounce around, and you really don't want to be chasing your instruments. So we continue flying out on the 1-5 heading, and notice that we're going a little slow, so we're going to trim down just a little bit, trim that nose down, and get it up to between 70 and 80 knots. And we've reached our 500 feet above the surface, so we're going to make our right turn. Remember, 1-5 is a right turn pattern. Now, another way to know when you're actually in the pattern, let me just pause here for a second. We're turning, turning, turning. Notice we have a little indicator right here and on this side, and we have it up here, and there's also one back here. So as you're turning, if you put runway 33 right here, then you will have made a 90-degree turn. So you don't have to be figuring out, okay, I need to be flying a certain heading to make sure I'm in the pattern. So we're just going to use this little tick mark here, and we're going to bring 33 up to that point, and then we'll know that we are making the correct path for our pattern. So let's continue on. Keep turning. And we're at pattern altitude, so we're going to drop the power down, and so now we are on, since we have 3-3 indicated here, we know that we are in a good position in our pattern. So let's step outside the airplane and take a look and see where we're at. Go up a little higher. So we have the airport here. We've come up and we've made our first turn, our crosswind turn. And you can see we're in a pretty good position here. So let's jump back inside here and continue on our flight. And we're pretty close to where we want to make our turn to the downwind. And I've obviously gotten a little bit too high here, so I'm going to start descending. I'm going to cut the throttle back. Now again, don't pay too much attention to our vertical speed here. Let's just get back to pattern altitude. And now what we want to do is bring 3-3 up here. That will be our heading, since that's the other runway, right? So we get 3-3 set up. And now we're going to stay right here until we get the airport midfield off our right side. And there it is. We're pretty much there. We're going to cut the power back, or put the carb heat on. I should have done that earlier. I'm going to add 2 notches of flaps here. That works for this airplane. I'm going to trim now. Now I'm going to pay a little bit of attention to my descent rate. I want the throttle around 1,500 RPM, and I'm going to get it right around 500 feet. We're not going to get too critical here. So now we're starting to descend, and we want to be looking back to get the airport at a 45-degree angle from us. So let's look over here, and we can see the airport over here. And I think it needs to be back this way a little bit more. We're not quite 45 degrees. So let's just continue on. And let's just go a little bit farther here. I'm going to trim down a little more. And let's take another look. In fact, let's do this outside this time. That might be easier. So let's jump outside. We're going to spin around here. come up. All right, so here's the runway over here, and that's looking pretty good. So we're going to start our base turn now. So let's get back inside and continue on. And now we're going to put 1.5 over here because that's the runway. So we want this at a 90-degree angle, right? So we'll put 1.5 there. And that way we'll know we are in a perfect position to make our final. And let's just take a look at this. So here's the runway right here, and it looks like we're in a really good position. Let's continue on. Now looking over there, it might be a little bit low, so I'm going to pull up again, level off. I'm going to have to add a little more power here. But we're going to keep coming along. Now we just keep looking over and find a place to where we make our final turn. So where is that going to be? Well, with this angle, I'm thinking right about now might be a good time to start our turn. Let's see. Yeah, let's just start our turn now and see how it happens. See what happens. So now we're just going to line up with the runway. So let's keep looking over there. There's the runway. I made that turn a little too soon, and if remember the lights, it looks like we're a little high, so I'm going to cut the power down. I'm going to go to full flaps and line up with the runway. There the lights are looking pretty good. And now we're just going to line up, watching our speed right around 60 knots. Now our descent rate here going to be about 250 knots once we get on the right glide slope here. I'm going to add a little more power. I'm getting a little slow. Well, that's okay. Just keeping that runway spot right there. And when I know I'm going to make the runway, I'm going to kill the power, which I think is right about now. We kill the power. And now we're just going to coast in, bring that nose up, keep it up, 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 and let it touch down right on the center line. And there we have it. We've made another little trip in the traffic pattern. So let's take a look at the pattern we just flew. Let's get the map going. And, well, I'm not too thrilled with this pattern, but that's okay. If you have flight path checked over here, you can actually see your pattern. And this is a little bit sloppy. I drifted off the runway heading here. This turn, well, it's kind of a gradual turn. I prefer a nicer turn like we had up here. And then I started my turn to final a little too soon. Should have started it out here. I want this to look like a really nice racetrack. So if you really want to learn to fly like they do in real life, then I suggest you just spend a lot of time flying the pattern. That's what I had to do when I first started flying. I spent the first couple weeks just in the pattern pretty much every day until I could get it right. And so take off, fly 3 patterns, and then see how they stack up on top of each other. If you just continued on and took off again, you'd just see every pattern you took here. And do this until you're happy with a very nice, tight, racetrack-looking pattern. All right, I want to give you a couple of tips here before we end this. So when you're in a pattern, use the tick marks here on the heading indicator, as I showed you, and don't worry too much about the vertical speed indicator here. You can use that to help you set up your descent, but don't worry about it on the turns, and on your final you might want to keep an eye on that, but that's not critical. Watch your speed on final approach. You don't want to get too slow. Keep it right around 60 knots. When you're on final, you should be right around 70 knots and right around 60 as you get closer to the runway. If you're too low, don't pull back on the yoke or your joystick and get into a climb. Just level off for a while. You will pick that slope up again. Don't react too quickly to these things. If you're really low, add a little power, but don't panic and go full throttle. Add some power, you'll get back on the glide slope. When you're sure you can make the runway now, reduce your power slowly to idle. And finally, make sure you land on the main wheels, keeping the nose wheels off the runway. Then bring the nose down slowly. I'm sure you've noticed in those last two videos here in our flights, I kept saying, keep the nose up, nose up, nose up. That's what my instructor kept telling me. So that's it for this video. Get out there and work on your patterns. If you like this, please click the like button. If you want to leave a comment or send me a message, that would be great. Thank you so much for watching, and God bless.